It's 2026, PC part prices are going up through the roof, but today I've set ourselves a bit of a challenge. Can we build a fully fledged gaming PC that can play a lot of the popular titles out there for under £100? So what we're going to use as the base of this system is this NZXT computer that we picked up a couple of weeks ago now for about £30. I'll throw up the exact price beneath, and this is going to serve as the base of our system because we've already got a case, we've got a power supply, we've got some storage, we've got a motherboard. It was an entire system. It was a nightmare to get it to this point because it was filthy, hardly working, random components were dropping out, but it does have some okay basic specifications. But a lot of these components aren't going to really hack it in 2026. I mean, we do have a 750 Ti, which works, but it's not ideal. We have an ancient Core i3 under here, but we do actually have a few good components we can use. We've got a Corsair power supply tucked down beneath here. We have a Z97 motherboard. It's not a very high-end one, but it works. And we do actually have 16 gigs of RAM. RAM is expensive now, so this probably makes up the vast majority of the value of this system. But I think upgrade number one we're going to do is the graphics card, because it's nice, but it just doesn't manage it very well in the modern day. But first of all, let's just turn this on and make sure it actually does still work. Now, this isn't a complete joke of a video. We genuinely do want to build a competitive gaming PC for under £100, which probably anyone could replicate all over the world, provided they don't mind picking up some used deals to start with, because this is going to someone to use as their new gaming computer. And we do get a display out of it. I cannot for the life of me remember what we left this running. It could be running Windows, it could be running anything. Okay, it is running Windows. I think it's probably running Windows 10. So this is what we're working with at the moment. We've got the 750 Ti 2GB, we've got the Haswell Core i3, we do have the 16 gigs of DDR3, which is pretty decent, and there is a 120 gig SSD for storage. Pretty much all of these are going to have to go. I can already hear the minuscule CPU fan ramping up crazily. Honestly, that's about what I was expecting from this system. Our graphics score is mediocre, the processor is around double. The first thing that's got to go is going to be that 750 Ti. We all love them, but the time has come where that isn't going to be enough. So let's see what our options are and what we can actually upgrade to without busting the budget. Number one, as an option, we could go with a GTX 1060. Admittedly, this is a scam one that we ordered quite cheap around Christmas. We could go for the classic Radeon equivalent, which is the RX 480. These aren't too bad. We looked at it last year, and these are around £30. Or I have the RX 580. Now, we paid £22 for this last year, and these are available everywhere on the market. It is the same card as this, and also the same tier as a 1060, but I think to give the system a little bit of flair and a little bit of pizzazz, shall we say, I think we're going to go with an RX 580, so that's our first bit of expense, and this cost us around £22. Yes, it still pains me to say it, but the RX 580 is still one of the best graphics cards you can buy on the used market for around the sort of £20 to £30 mark, because this will run a lot of games. It's got 8 gigs of VRAM. Yes, we hate hearing people bang on about them, but I've never used one in a gaming PC. God, it's nice not working on jank because I'm the person that rebuilt this PC. Yes, modded drivers are available, but unless you're pretty much only playing Counter-Strike or GTA Online, you're better off just using the ones from AMD. And the plan is to do this the same way we sort of did our last cheap PC build, where we are going to be testing along each step as we go, given that we are working with a base system. You can pick up old custom builds of this era for anywhere sort of around the £30 mark. I've picked up plenty more for videos this year. All we've done is taken this 35 quid system, whack in a 20 quid graphics card, and install some drivers. So let's see what kind of performance we get out of this now. Well, immediately we are getting a lot more performance. As nice as the old 750 Ti was back in the day, these are getting on a bit. Well, it's not exactly a particularly awe-inspiring score from the graphics card, but given this isn't really set up very well, we are already scoring above the average for a setup like this. All seems absolutely fine. We are just incredibly processor bound. And I do have a solution for this. Now, this here is the big one that I've been excited for. This was around £12 and has taken so long to get here, well, about 2 weeks, and they've given me a coupon for it for £1 off my next order. So this was a Haswell Xeon, actually inside. I've not opened this yet. A bundle that's full of cling film. There it is. This is going to be handling all of the worlds of modern games for us. And this is meant to be a big upgrade over our Core i3 and cost me just £12. And I am curious if we can get away without upgrading the cooler. Something tells me probably not, But at the same time, we might as well give it a go first. One of the worst cooler designs in the world is Intel's pushpins. I hate them. 2, 3. I think we're going to keep that little i3 because I am curious how that is doing, so we can keep that for its own video. For 12 quid, this seems like a really quite powerful upgrade. But I've never used one before, but lots of people have been talking about them. Fortunately for everyone involved, I'm not an idiot, and I don't think this cooler is going to be enough. But I do want to know what it's going to do with the stock cooler, so we're going to try it anyway. We love Intel's pushpin design so much. They definitely aren't designed for single use only. That's in. That's in. They did actually clip in that time. Because we did test the Haswell Core i5s quite comprehensively. And for most forms of modern gaming, they were still fine, but they were just lacking in threads. They had plenty of IPC and the single-threaded performance was still passable, but the problem is, you just only had 4 threads. So I'm hoping 8 threads for £12 should be enough. That cooler really does not look adequate in the slightest. Wait, is this going to run okay on that terrible little cooler? 67 degrees, 68 degrees. Honestly, I was sort of expecting this to just sort of run at 80-ish degrees. What is our running total up to at the moment? So we've got the £22 RX 580, £12 Xeon. We're up to about 70 quid for this entire system at the moment, but we still have bits and pieces left to sort out. In case anyone was wondering how much money you save buying the Xeon over the i7, the i7 is £28, the Xeon is £12, so you are getting a pretty good deal. You're saving about 15 quid. It's both a combination of the processor and the graphics card getting hot here. The RX 580 is set up pretty badly out of the box, so I believe we will make some modifications to that. And how much of that is going to be due to thermals? We will be able to see if it is thermals. Judging by the fan ramping up, I'm going to say quite a lot of this is going to be thermals. Okay, that is a much more balanced system. 3,840. What were our thermals like? Not as bad as I was thinking there. No, it is throttling a little bit on the boost clocks when it's getting up there. Comparing this against our properly set up Core i5 4670K, which was overclocked, no Spectrum meltdown, fast RAM, it scored about 35 points less than this on a terrible stock cooler. And this is a £12 processor. So I think processor performance-wise, we're looking pretty good. But the maximum temperature went up to was 89 degrees before it throttled back. So, as much as we don't need to touch the cooling, I'm sure that's plenty. Yeah, it turns out that this is a very efficient processor. I know Haswell always was. This is running a processor that is still viable in the modern day on this awful Intel pushpin design. It pains me, we don't really need to touch it, but I have bought better cooling. I want to use it, I just have to use it for this. It was too good of a deal. It was too good. Now channel members will know what this is, because I unboxed it for them. This is a full water cooling setup from China for £13. It may have even been less than that. They were doing a run-out sale on these. I've used this brand before. I don't know why this was so cheap. I've not tested it. I've only unboxed it. But this is a full water cooling setup. And we're going to throw it in this because, come on, we've still got a bit of budget left over. Why don't we waste some of it on this? Because we got to have water cooling, why can't we? We're probably going to need to make some space for this. Have we ever done a water-cooled budget build on this channel? I don't think so. So this is it, this is the £12 water cooling I've bought. We've got a fan, we've got the all-in-one system, the mounting set, and our instructions to try and figure out. I've done this before. This works on absolutely everything, I believe, from like LGA 775 upwards. Where do we even begin? It's gone. It's going in the bin. It's going straight in the bin. Oh, we even get a little tube of thermal paste. Yeah, we'll just put that there and figure it out. Oh, did I actually cable manage these in? So we've got to slide these to LGA 1150. I'm guessing these are like a refurb unit, maybe? Originally, we were just going to use one of these cheap iGo ones, which are like £4 or £5 on AliExpress as like an upgrade. The water cooling came up cheap, and I thought, we may as well go water cooling, why not? With the buckle attached to the front. Yeah, that goes through. I do have a feeling this is going to be rather overkill given the thermals we've already seen. But if it helps us keep the boost clocks high, that is going to matter quite a bit for modern gaming, so hopefully this all goes rather well. Throwbot. That took a bit longer than I was expecting to get that all installed, but there is our water cooling running. The idea is it's going to pull in cool air from the front. I don't know how well that's going to work, but let's be honest, it doesn't really have to cool that much. It's going to then exhaust via these two up here. Who knows? It's a 12 quid setup. If this even works, I'm going to be impressed. So let's find out. Does it actually pump or do something? The lights come on. I heard a pump come on. We probably are going to need to set voltages for this, because as much as this does have two headers, we need the pump to be on a constant voltage. Oh, am I going to have to plug in a mouse? Right, so that should be set up now that the pump is on a fixed voltage. Now, apparently this case is terrible for thermals, but given all it has to actually have in it is the RX 580, which we will tweak, and the water cooling, which is cooling something that even... I'd get the old cooler out, but I've already binned it. Let's see what kind of thermals we get in a quick stress test. So if I leave this running for, say, 10, 15 minutes. So yeah, this thing now runs incredibly well. It is just staying locked on the 2040 and doesn't move about at all. It is pretty much staying at a constant speed. So yeah, I'm willing to say water cooling on this is a tad overkill, but for the sake of £12, why don't we have water cooling? Let's just get a result in 3D Mark. Well, it's not a revolutionary increase in performance, but it is an increase in performance, so I'm not going to really argue with that. Temperatures now top out at 56 degrees. I did pick up some standards, just really boring 1 terabyte, tiny little 2.5 inch hard drive storage. This was about £4 from CEX, because it's a Toshiba one and apparently no one wants Toshiba drives. But let's go whack a modern version of Windows on here, get a hard drive added in. Well, we are here with Windows 11 running on the system. I know that will upset a few people. I'm sure we'll do some Linux testing later on in the video, but for the person that's having this computer, they want Windows 11 on it. So that is what we're going to start off with testing, and it is the latest version running the IoT version, which is stripped down to literally nothing more than a start bar and a browser. So this is as basic as you can get it. We've got the Intel Xeon E3 1270V3, which of course is more or less a Core i7-4770. We've got the RX 580 running. We've got our 16 gigs of RAM. I've still got to connect up that hard drive, but we don't need it at the moment. We've got the water cooling, keeping everything nice and cold. And all we've got left to do is tweak the system, and we're pretty much good to go. So I want to start with the graphics card, because all I'm going to do is whack a small undervolt on here at the power state for state 3 all the way along, apply these changes. Power consumption has immediately dropped to around 140 watts, which is good enough. We are just going to disable both of them and then restart the computer. We can set it so it's running at a forced 3.9 gigahertz. There's very little tweaking you can do unless you've got a K-series processor on Haswell. It's not as forgiving as the earlier ones are. So in total, this entire system, with all of the upgrades fully built, has cost us £85. And I genuinely do believe, in 2026, the best way of doing this is to pick up one of these old Haswell gaming PCs. Because we grabbed this £35. Yes, it was filthy. Yes, it wasn't exactly the best constructed system in the world. But because Microsoft says, oh, this can't run Windows 11, people believe them. This will run Windows 11 fine. You can get one of these, you can do some easy upgrades, you probably don't have to do the water cooling, you probably don't have to add in the extra hard drive. I mean, really, if you wanted some extra additions to make, I suppose maybe adding another 16 gigs of RAM you could do, but 16 gigs should be fine for a system like this. All it's got to do is play some of the popular titles on Steam. It's got to be cool, it's got to be reliable, and I think it's going to do it good. Right, I'm putting the BIOS back to auto because I think what I've done is by manually setting the clocks, it's doing a worse job. So I did go back through and revert my changes, and it turns out, no, there's no performance change between Windows 10. We got the same 4,287 score on both of them, so I'm happy with that. Why don't we go ahead, just see what performance is like out of the box, and then I think we're pretty much ready to go and see what this system can do, and then later on in the video find out if maybe it's any better on Linux. I mean, to be fair, 4 cores, 8 threads, 16 gigs of RAM, and a Polaris graphics card, this system is pretty much screaming out to run Linux. So we will be doing some testing. Right, all I've done is click Go in Game. I've not changed around any settings. It seems to be working okay from the menu that I've seen. But Arc Raiders, this is a newer title out. How does it perform on a sub £100 gaming PC? So it does seem like both our processor and our graphics card are at 100%. It's hovering between sort of 60 to 70 FPS. This is one of my few times I get to see this game without the very lowest settings. I didn't know it could actually look this nice. Okay, the game has defaulted to AMD FSR 3 with the balance mode, and it is running medium, pretty much all on medium, other than anti-aliasing, which we don't really need. So that's everything turned up to medium. I'm going to keep FSR on because, to be fair, it's a really nice implementation in this game. I do just want to cap the frame rate at 60 to see what it does, and it has dramatically improved our frame times. We're sort of getting around a locked 60 FPS with medium settings, 1% lows down to around sort of 42 FPS. I think the 60 FPS cap is necessary because as good as that processor's doing, it is still a Haswell processor, but still, there we go. Modern title, medium settings, 1080p. Yes, we are using FSR, but we're getting a locked 60 FPS, all for under 100 quid. You know what? I think this is a gaming computer. Right, I'm going to get some results through 3D Mark, and we are going to carry on with the rest of the video. We will try and cover absolutely everything. But as it stands at the moment, I'm pretty happy with that performance. I don't know much about this game. I don't know how to play this game. I'm just going to run in a building so I don't die. But this is running really nicely. I'm happy with that. So yes, we did get the system all fully built. I have cut a lot of bits and pieces out of this, because to be fair, most of it was me just getting very, very confused at the water cooling system, and then realising this case is terrible for mounting, and then just all of these other issues. But at the end of the day, we have built a full gaming PC for under £100. And this is something that anyone could quite easily replicate. All you have to do is go on eBay, go on Marketplace, go on some sort of local selling website, and just search for a gaming PC or a PC, anything that's sort of running the Intel Haswell socket right now. They are dirt cheap. Why? Because according to Microsoft, they can't run Windows 11 and they are just flooding the market. We hadn't covered anything Haswell really until this year, because they are just becoming such good pieces of value, given that the system can still run a lot of things absolutely fine. I am doing more Haswell testing this year, and really all we've had to do is take this base system and figure out what upgrades we can make. So that £12 Xeon will work on pretty much all boards. The RX 580, yes, you may have to undervolt it if your power supply is not up to it, but even in this, we're only running a cheap 430 watt Corsair unit, and that'll probably run till the end of the earth with that graphics card on board. Storage is really up to you, and DDR3 RAM, yes, it's gone up in price, but if you did want to make some upgrades, you're talking £16 for 16 gigabytes, it's still quite affordable. The one stupid thing I've done is add water cooling. Yes, you could argue we did score an extra 35, 45 points in 3D Mark, but you don't need to worry about that. Haswell is inherently such an efficient architecture that even that minuscule and terrible little Core i3 cooler can handle an Intel Xeon or a Core i7 absolutely fine. So yes, you can quite easily build a system like this if you just go and look for the parts. So just what are the full specifications of our custom £85 computer? Well, for the processor we are using the Intel Xeon, which is a Haswell based E3-1270V3, which is pretty much a Core i7-4770, but with a much lower price tag. You get 4 cores and 8 threads that tend to hover around 3.7 GHz, but can boost to just shy of 4 GHz when it needs to. The graphics card is the very cheap and very popular AMD Radeon RX 580 with the 8GB model, just because that gives us plenty of VRAM, and these are still very cheap on the market provided you don't mind getting one on an auction. We've got 16GB of DDR3 memory running at 1600MHz, and this is just what came with the original base of the computer. Storage is 120GB in the form of the SSD that came with the system, and a 1TB hard drive for additional storage. For some reason I have added water cooling. I was just going to go with a cheap air cooler, but honestly, even then we didn't need that. These chips are so power efficient that you don't really need much to cool them. So yes, I spent £12 on water cooling. You could say it looks cool, that's about all it's doing. Yes, it does keep the processor cool as well and gives us around 30 points extra in 3D Mark, but it's nothing really notable. We're running Windows 11 IoT just because it's cut down and it's efficient on RAM and it's the latest version of Windows. Don't worry, there is Linux testing coming later. data, and the system is powered by a Corsair CX430M power supply, which is, once again, just something that came with the base system. You can throw something together like this for around £85 or under $100. It is quite easy to get a lot of these components, and for the moment, they haven't all gone up to obscene prices. The thing is though, I did document our journey as we got here. Our base system returned a total score of 1,335 in the original 3D Mark test we did, with most of it being a limit by the old 750 Ti included. Upgrading that graphics card alone boosted up to 3,739, but then again we were limited by an old dual core. Throwing in that £12 Xeon gave us a much more balanced system, now resulting in an overall score of 4,287, and from here it was just tweaking the system around, so installing Windows 11 IoT, disabling Spectre and Meltdown, just ensuring the system was all set up and working properly, and that returned us a result of 4,342, boosting up the processor a little bit, and also letting the graphics card achieve its full clocks by using less power. If it's an AMD Polaris graphics card, unless it's the original launch series, they do use an obscene amount of power for seemingly no reason. I do really believe today that one of the standout parts that we've gone with is that Intel Xeon, which makes me really want to do a dedicated video on them, and probably the i7 as well, which this is equivalent to, because when we actually look at how it performs, we're seeing just shy of 4-core Ryzen performance, which I know a lot of people still using these processors today, and we're getting that level of performance for £12. In fact, it's even going as far as beating a fully tuned up Core i5-4670K that was overclocked on fast RAM with all of the Meltdown and Spectre bits got rid of on a tuned up setup, and we're beating that by just simply throwing this in what is a cheap Z97 board, so you do get a decent chunk of processor performance for the money. At the same time, it's never going to be competing with 8-core Zen 2 processors like the Ryzen 7 3700X, but at the end of the day, you know what, that's a fairly admirable result for a £12 processor. In terms of the graphics card, well, it's an RX 580. It's slightly better than a 1060, it's slightly worse than an R9 Fury, but you get 8 gigs of VRAM, and you do at least get some degree of driver updates with it. So it performs okay, it's bang in the middle of our graph, and that's exactly where it should be. In the case of it being in this computer, yes, we did score slightly slower than it being in a brand new system, but then again, that's sort of what you'd expect from it being in an older PC. In terms of progression throughout synthetic tests, in Cloudgate we were limited by the single core performance of the processor, as the graphics card was scoring upwards of 60,000. Firestrike showed an equal balance in DirectX 11 titles, scoring just over 10,000, in fact just shy of 11,000. Timespy and Still Nomad Lite show that entry-level DirectX 12 games aren't a problem, and the full-fat Still Nomad actually did a decent result of 1,034, showing that even in new titles, we should be able to eke out a playable frame rate on a system like this. Now, my plans for testing this system today is to run it up against a lot of popular titles that people would likely be playing on a system like this, and to just really give the system a chance to show off what it can do. There are of course going to be some titles that it is going to struggle with, because there are some newer Unreal Engine 5 titles on the list that of course some people are going to think aren't even going to launch on a PC like this. But you know what? I've got pretty high hopes. Given this was a cheap computer and something that does have a degree of expandability left over, I am hoping it's going to perform well. After this, I do have some Linux testing planned because, let's be honest, it's a Polaris-based system. They have great drivers over on Linux, arguably better than the Windows drivers are, so that should be an interesting thing to see. I've also done a bit of extra benchmarking, just some classics that people always request, but they aren't going to be in the main benchmark segment. So with all of that out of the way, if you build yourself a cheap sub £100 or sub $100 computer, just what kind of performance can you expect in the benchmarks? Starting off with the latest release of GTA 5 with the Enhanced Edition, and the game had already defaulted to the very high preset with HBAO enabled. This was all in a 1080p resolution, and we did see 65 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 54 FPS. At the end of the day, this is a very optimized title that will even run fine on dual-core processors, so having 4 cores and 8 threads certainly does help. Also, having a Polaris graphics card that deals with DirectX 12 particularly well means that this really isn't a problem whatsoever. Even if you go over into the world of online, which, when you keep in mind the actual enhanced version of GTA Online is well optimized, our average went up to 68 FPS, and our 1% lows went up slightly to 57 FPS. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing if you're playing single player or offline, building a cheap gaming PC like this, well, for these new versions of GTA 5, you're going to be having a great time in single player, and arguably online will run even better. Given the popularity of GTA 5 Legacy, though, it is worth including as a test. The game defaulted to the Ultra settings, so everything's set to Ultra and then the advanced options turned on, with AMD CHS shadows enabled in a 1080p resolution. And we returned 68 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 57 FPS. At the end of the day, these components would have been considered very, very high-end for a game like this on its launch, so no problems dealing with it here. However, one of the reasons why I do like including this as a test is the legacy version of GTA Online is arguably a bit of a mess these days. When utilizing the exact same settings, well, utilization does drop on both the processor and the graphics card. The only utilization that went up was our VRAM and our system RAM, but our frame rates, we were now down to 44 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 36 FPS. This is a common issue with GTA Online's legacy version, and is likely one of the reasons why there's been such a big push towards getting people to play the enhanced version. It is simply a lot more stable, and arguably probably a lot less bloated than how much this has been built upon since the early days, which means that this version, it'll still run, just don't expect the same kind of performance you saw over in the enhanced edition. Next up, of course, we have Counter-Strike 2. Chances are, if you're building a cheap computer like this, you are going to be doing a degree of competitive gaming, and Counter-Strike 2 is sort of the go-to of these. We're testing with low settings and dynamic shadows enabled on the high options, which apparently is what people are now using for the most competitive experience. In 1080p, we saw an average of 192 FPS, with 1% lows down to 131 FPS throughout the built-in benchmark, which wasn't too bad of a showing. You've got to keep in mind, the smokes here and a lot of the effects aren't reminiscent of real-world gameplay, but at the end of the day it does give you a fairly reliable result. Dropping this resolution back to the popular 960p stretched 4x3 resolution, and we saw an arguably much more competitive experience with 259 FPS on average, and 1% lows down to 164 FPS. At the end of the day, I don't think Counter-Strike 2 even acknowledges we've got hyper-threading, so this is probably very similar to what you get on a 4-core 4-thread Xeon, just you've got a few extra threads there to handle background tasks, so maybe it's a bit more stable, and this was a pretty decent experience. When dropping into more intensive maps like Nuke, for example, you'd see the game hover between 140 to 190 FPS, although this figure was taken from an offline match, which is arguably putting even more load on one of the weaker components of the system with the processor. But still, at the end of the day, this is a 12 quid Xeon, it's handling Counter-Strike 2 in intensive scenarios, newer maps, you're still getting well in excess of 100 frames per second, and it's not really struggling whatsoever, so I can't really fault it. Now, Arc Raiders, I really do enjoy benchmarking because we've seen it work remarkably well on some really dirgy low-end hardware, so how does it deal with what is actually quite a decent system? Well, with medium settings and FSR set to balance, which is how the game wants you to be running, we returned 60 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 51 FPS. We managed to improve the frame times quite dramatically by not using the built-in cap in-game, but capping it externally through MSI Afterburner, something that you may want to consider doing if you are running a system like this or planning on building it. There's still tweaking that can be done outside of the game to return a smoother experience. And to be fair, it ran pretty good, it stayed pretty much in and around that frame rate, and with the FPS cap in place, it gave our Xeon a little bit of breathing room to ensure that things did actually run as they were meant to. For some people that do have an undying hatred of FSR, to be fair, I'm not a fan of it in most titles, I just think Arc Raiders is one of the few games that utilizes it in a sense where it doesn't look like a smudge on your screen. I did run it through with no anti-aliasing at all, so this is just a native 1080p image, and our frame rate dropped down to 53 FPS, with 1% lows now at 45 FPS, which honestly, I'm using a FreeSync monitor, so it wasn't too much of a problem. There is some screen tearing in the in-game recording that we've done here, but of course that's taken externally via a capture card that wasn't present for me when I'm actually playing it. Pretty much all monitors have FreeSync now, so that is one advantage of going with an AMD card, and it's all of these little things that are worth talking about, because at the end of the day, you could build a system like this for under £100. Now, Oblivion Remastered, I didn't hold out a great deal of hope for. That's not because our system's bad, it's just because, Well, as much fun as this game is, it really is the epitome of everything wrong with Unreal Engine 5. It wants obscene amounts of VRAM, it wants obscene amounts of system RAM, it wants cores that it's not even going to use beyond stopping it stuttering. Yeah, it's all just a bit of a mess. But we were able to eke out a playable experience with medium settings and FSR set to its balance mode in 1080p. We returned 36 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 26 FPS, but the game would take 5 to 10 minutes or so on first launch to actually stabilise. I'm assuming this is something to do with the shaders that haven't finished compiling yet, and us probably having limited system RAM and only 4 cores. For those of you that were wondering if you could play this without having to use FSR, you can keep the same settings, and you have to drop the resolution to 900p. I put a 30 FPS cap in place, which did help ease out the frame rate slightly. So yeah, Oblivion Remastered, you can eke out a playable experience, and honestly, if you didn't mind dropping it to lower settings, it would likely be a little bit better, but at that point, well, just go and play the original Oblivion. This, on the other hand though, is probably a good example of what will run very well on this system. With high settings and FSR set to its balance mode in 1080p, Cyberpunk 2077 returned us just north of 60 FPS through its built-in benchmark, but as anyone that's actually tested or played this game will tell you, it's not exactly reminiscent of real gameplay. Real gameplay though did return us 54 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 42 FPS, and honestly, I wasn't expecting it to look or run this well on such a cheap system. Honestly, I'd quite happily play Cyberpunk 2077 through like this, and just given that not everyone does like using FSR, I will defend Cyberpunk here and say FSR is one of the implementations that I do actually like of FSR, but in case you didn't want to run it, you can turn it off and you'll be getting closer to a 30 FPS experience with these settings, returning 38 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 31 FPS. Honestly, with or without FSR, Cyberpunk runs really well on this system, and that little Xeon that we added for £12, well, it still has more to give here. Really, the Radeon RX 580 was entirely our limit, so honestly, if we had the power supply for it, maybe whack in a Vega 64 or something like that, and well, the Xeon would be absolutely fine with it. Next up we have PUBG, which did run pretty good after a little while. On these older 4-core processors, well, you do run into a few problems here or there when you first get into a match. While utilising a mixture of medium and high settings and the DirectX 12 API in a 1080p resolution, I was aiming to try and get a locked 60 FPS, and we did return a 60 FPS average with 1% lows down to 49 FPS. It's worth noting though that I'm assuming it's shader compilation and bits and pieces like that, a lot of modern titles do this, that it would take at least a couple of games before it calmed down properly. So yes, you can play PUBG, just be aware that probably most updates will result in some stuttering for the first, say, 15 minutes of gameplay, and this is sort of be expected when you only have a 4-core processor, and you're asking it to run a game that admittedly is somewhat okay optimized today, but still has its own problems. Now this one I actually forgot to benchmark, and I've done this one again and then I've inserted it into the middle because for some reason BeamNG was doing an update and I just forgot to test it, but luckily I did reinstall it and we're all good. Running the game with the high preset in the jungle map with traffic enabled in a 1080p resolution did return us a fairly good experience with 44 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 36 FPS. So honestly, this system deals with this absolutely fine. The Xeon's definitely got enough IPC to handle what's going on. You've got 8 threads at least to handle what traffic is happening, and even on those intensive maps you are still seeing a playable frame rate. Simpler maps and scenarios would net you well over 60 FPS, so BeamNG on a system like this, not really a problem, not that any of us I think really thought it would be, but it's nice to see that you can play it on the intensive situations with the traffic enabled and still return good visuals and a good frame rate. Always a popular one for people that are building budget PCs. Lots of people don't like testing Rust, and I completely understand why. The settings menu is a complete and utter mess, and actually trying to get a reliable benchmark figure takes some time. So this is taken from a combination of the built-in benchmark and actual gameplay, and with medium and high settings in 1080p, we returned 65 FPS on average, and 1% lows down to 52 FPS. In standard fashion, with a system using a Radeon GPU, this figure would stabilise after around sort of the first first 2 minutes of gameplay. You get a few bits of texture pop in here or there, but they quickly disappear, and then once you'd launched the game for the first time, that was pretty much done and dealt with. For some reason, that just seems to be the case with some of these Radeon cards that you don't get so much on the Nvidia side, but at the end of the day, when you're getting frame rates like this, can you really argue? The game is optimized to an okay level, but does want a lot of VRAM, so having 8GB of it here is quite useful. Red Dead Redemption 2, I just let the game launch with the settings it wants to use. For a similar reason as Rust, the settings menu in this game, even when you have enough VRAM to configure it around, usually it sort of knows what it's doing, so I just left it with these settings, which was a combination of high and ultra settings while utilizing the Vulkan render option. In a 1080p resolution, we returned 66 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 53 FPS. So pretty much the worst case scenario you're going to be seeing in this game is hovering around the mid-50s, and this was when there was lots of heavy action, gunfights, bits and pieces like that going on. Yeah, Red Dead Redemption 2 looks and runs great on a system like this. It's just one of those games that I'm always reluctant to test because it's very rare I get a system that has 8GB of VRAM. But if you wanted to build a system like this, well, that's certainly not going to be an issue for you. But as much praise as we've given this system so far, there is something I always knew it was going to struggle with. Baldur's Gate 3 is very CPU and GPU intensive, and one of our main issues is the fact that this game just runs appallingly on most AMD graphics cards, mostly because the Vulkan render option is completely broken these days, so you're stuck with DirectX 11. In fact, if you go back a few years ago, when we started testing this game and Vulkan worked, well, you could play this fine on a lot of Radeon cards, but these days, well, you're stuck with DirectX 11, and utilizations, or just frame times in general, are all over the place. With high settings, not that it mattered what settings you used, you could pop it down to low or medium and you'd still see a very similar amount of utilization and frame rate, returned as 36 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 24. So yes, one of the downsides of using a Radeon card, there are some games out there that whether it's AMD's fault on their driver-side optimizations, whether it's the developer's fault, whether it's Nvidia's fault for, I think they sponsored this game, so who knows, but it doesn't run very well here. To contrast this, on the other side of things though, we have Hitman, which runs great on virtually all systems we've ever tested, but I did want to stress things out here, so utilise the high settings and the best simulation options, which started off absolutely fine and returned us 45 FPS on average, but unfortunately the game would become a stuttery mess when lots was going on. This is just simply too much for the system, and I'm going to say it's the processor that's struggling to keep up with all the physics that's being asked of it, so yeah, you really can't manage the best settings here. If we utilise the same high settings but turn our simulation back down to the base mode though, it runs absolutely flawlessly on this system. We return 60 FPS through the newer Dartmoor benchmark map, with 1% lows down to 55 FPS. The game was pretty much locked to 60 FPS throughout the entire benchmark with these settings, so Hitman looks and runs great, but does show that our Xeon is going to struggle in certain simulation tasks when lots of physics effects are being asked of it. Fallout 4's Anniversary Edition is always a heavily requested benchmark because it does run better on certain systems, but is certainly more VRAM intensive than it used to be. We utilised the Ultra preset because that's what the game detected for us to use, and it did return us a playable 55 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 41 FPS. Once again, this figure is taken during a heavy section of the gameplay, so it's pretty much a worst case scenario figure, as when you were out and about or in smaller areas, you'd see the game locked to pretty much a constant 60 FPS, something it could be here when not much was going on. Really, I think the graphics card and the processor are to blame, but then at the same time, we could just blame this entirely on the fact that Fallout 4, even with the anniversary update, is still a bit of an enigma when it comes to its performance. So it runs fine, you can get away with it with ultra settings, things did get a little bit better when dropping back to high, but you'd still get the frame drops in the same places. So yeah, Fallout 4 Anniversary, it's playable, but at the same time, just expect the standard Bethesda issues. Mount and Blade Bannerlord defaulted to the very high settings, so I thought, you know what, it's usually pretty good at telling how it wants to run, let's see how it does through the built-in benchmark. And we returned 87 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 60 FPS. Keep in mind this is very reminiscent of the late game, so during smaller battles you'd see well in excess of 100 FPS, and I think one of my main takeaways from this, I mean I've already seen a Polaris graphics card deal with this game very well, but seeing an old 12-pound Intel Xeon processor handle large battles like this fine, which are reminiscent of the late game, without all too many problems, it deserves a degree of commendation, because I wasn't expecting this out of what is quite a very simulation-heavy game. I thought we'd have to turn down the battle size or something like that, but no, the processor simply wasn't a problem whatsoever. But finally, can our £85 gaming PC manage Crysis Remastered? Which is remarkably intensive with the higher settings. I know I do praise it for its optimizations, but these high settings do look absolutely gorgeous. And because of this, well, we were able to return a 31 FPS average, with 1% lows down to 26 FPS, which isn't too bad, keep in mind, and given how intensive this game is with higher settings, I was just happy to see 30 FPS with these types of visuals. It's worth noting though that this game, when you do drop it back to medium, this game will run extremely well, often in times in excess of 100 FPS when you drop the settings back, so really it's up to you. Do you want to enjoy Crysis Remastered with quite a few of the graphical effects enabled with the high settings and return a 30 FPS experience, or do you want to turn a couple of these off and enjoy it at well over 100 FPS? Really, I think it's the graphics card struggling more than anything here, because this can be very intensive at higher settings, but still, we're seeing Crysis Remastered run on what is a very cheap system, and it can just about eke out high settings provided you don't mind a 30 FPS target, which to me, that's quite impressive. So, overall performance of our £85 gaming PC, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with it. I would say that I am surprised that in a lot of instances we were definitely more GPU bound than we were CPU bound, which is something I wasn't expecting. I was fully expecting our cheap 12 quid Xeon to be the full bottleneck of the system, but I do think we could handle a better graphics card in this PC, so there is a degree of upgrade potential. I am going to apologise that Fortnite wasn't included in these benchmarks. I'm going to tell you it'll run absolutely fine because we've tested on a weaker processor than this in Haswell i5, and it ran it at pretty much a locked 60 FPS, and we've also tested it on the RX 580, and it also ran it absolutely fine. Unfortunately, for some reason, I spent all night downloading it, and then it decided it'd corrupt the download files after it had installed them. Makes no sense to me. The files are on there, I can double click the .exe file, and then it tells me to launch it through the Epic Launcher, which doesn't work because the Epic Launcher is useless, can't validate files. I even tried re-downloading it and then giving it the files in the re-downloaded folder. Nothing. It's pointless, it's useless. I'm going to stop my rant there, but that's the reason we didn't test it. For a lot of the popular games on Steam that people are actually playing, your Ark Raiders, your Counter-Strike 2, your GTAs, your Cyberpunk, even your Red Dead Redemptions, these are absolutely fine on a system like this. This is what this system has been built to do. Yes, some people are going to chime in and say, oh, but budget builds, there's some games that have mandatory ray tracing these days, and your system can't play them, and I disagree with this, and it makes me unhappy. Yeah, sure, but at the same time, this was never built to play those games. This was taken against the top games that people are actually playing on Steam, and it plays a lot of them. And as we've already seen from the benchmarks, the processor still has plenty to give. I will likely cover this processor in its own dedicated video, because I think it handled ray trace titles absolutely fine. All you've got to do is bung in an RTX graphics card, or an equivalent AMD or Intel card, and it'll deal with it fine. So yeah, this has really surprised me. But at the same time, there are a couple of additional benchmarks I wanted to do. They're not really games that are going to challenge the system, but they're games that people are playing. So I want to do a really quick-fire classic gaming test just to show what it can do, and in the quickest benchmark segment I can possibly manage. I've done a bit of additional benchmarking just to prove to you that even the older games that you might think you'd run into compatibility problems with, you're not going to have any problems with whatsoever. So I suppose we can see how this PC performs with the additional, the classic, I don't even know, the whatever extra benchmarks. Right, so we are going to properly quickfire these benchmarks. I want to see how it do in CSGO. It's back on Steam, it's very popular at the moment. How does a system like this, which honestly would have been age appropriate for it with some of those components, deal with CSGO? Well, with an offline match, which does put more strain on the processor, we returned 203 FPS with competitive settings, with 1% lows down to 168 FPS, which overall felt very playable and actually quite enjoyable. Honestly, you've had no problems at all playing Counter-Strike Go on this system, but then again, this system is also quite age appropriate in some regards, given the processor is actually from the era people were playing this on. Another good test of the Source engine is Black Mesa. I really wanted to include it in the actual main benchmarks, but then again, a system like this will also deal with it absolutely fine. So if you are looking at playing any Source game whatsoever, with Black Mesa we played the game with high settings in the Zen level, which utilised the DirectX 9 renderer. I didn't want to use DXVK because it runs into some problems at times, but with a 1080p resolution we returned 99 FPS and 1% lows down to 66 FPS, and it looked absolutely gorgeous while it was doing it. You've got to keep in mind this game is quite single-threaded, which really does go to show that the Haswell IPC is still quite viable today, given this game came out quite a while after the platform ceased to actually be viable to most people. One thing that I do like about AMD's drivers is you do get a lot of features involved which you can enable in a lot of classic titles. Fable Lost Chapters return at 60 FPS on average with a frame rate cap in place and 1% lows down to 51 FPS. It's worth noting the graphics card was fully utilised a lot of the time because the game was utilising high settings, anisotropic filtering set to its maximum, and we were super sampling the game 8 times over in a 1080p resolution. That's right, this game is running at an obscenely high resolution and still returning 60 FPS with great looking visuals and no graphical glitches or problems, which is quite a good thing because Fable sometimes runs into these on modern systems. Although we know the PC can play Mountain Blade Bannerlord with absolutely no problems whatsoever, it is worth testing the classic Mountain Blade Warband given that it is quite single-threaded and still a very popular title. I ran it with the Viking Conquest DLC, which apparently makes the game look prettier, but that's up to you to decide. We were running it with the very high settings and a large battle in 1080p with lots of people and lots of things going on. We returned 41 FPS on average, although frame pacing could be a little bit of a problem at the start of a battle. Honestly, not really too much of a problem. At the end of the day, you could still enjoy this quite easily with the very high settings, and utilization isn't too much of a problem on the system, so it doesn't matter whether you want to play the newer title or the older title, you've still got more than enough IPC to deal with both. Given the comments I made about Oblivion Remastered and the fact you could just go back and play the original, I thought, well, you know what, why don't we make it a bit more intensive and play the original version of Skyrim, which if anything is more intensive than Oblivion is. With very high settings in 1080p, which is pretty much the game set to Ultra, we returned 60 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 51 FPS. And this was during intensive situations and scenes, so most of the time you'd be pretty much seeing a completely locked 60 FPS. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what one of the classic Bethesda games you're playing, you're pretty much looking at a consistent 60 FPS across the board, and you could likely apply some driver-side injected enhancements if you really wanted to improve the look of the game. I absolutely despise testing city skylines these days given the optimizations this game seems to be lacking in modern updates. Given we used to be able to run this on a HD 5450, it's quite depressing to see that an £85 gaming PC can play the game, but regardless of the settings that we use, we would return around 30 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 22 FPS. It didn't matter whether using medium or high or something like that. For some reason this game just seems to be such a bloated mess these days that pretty much the entire system will struggle for seemingly no reason, mostly the graphics card more than the processor, which once again proves my point you could likely handle a higher end graphics card without having to touch the processor whatsoever. But finally, can it run Warehouse and Logistics Simulator? I don't really know if you could say this is playable, but at the same time this game looks absolutely hideous and seems to be one of the most intensive DirectX 9 games out there. You've got to keep in mind the original Crysis could also run on DirectX 9 but seems to be less intensive than this is. Still, with ultra settings, SSAO, HDR and anisotropic filtering and anti-aliasing with a 1080p resolution, we return 48 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 33 FPS. The game looks mostly hideous. I'm assuming every mirror, window or anything like that is generating another world of the entire game you're already playing, if you could even begin to call this a game. At the end of the day, this is the most intensive DirectX 9 game I've ever found, and it seems to be mostly requested by people that seem to like me suffering, so at the end of the day, Warehouse and Logistics Simulator will work. So yes, classic gaming performance and older titles like that will run absolutely fine on a system like this. For games of the era of its parts, or sort of before then, well, you're looking at pretty much a completely overkill system, so that's not a worry. And no, I didn't speed my voice up there, I just spoke incredibly quickly. So at the same time, yes, you do get a few driver-side features that are nice because it is an AMD graphics card, and some of their legacy options for turning on things like super sampling or high-quality anisotropic filtering do work absolutely fine in older titles. Beyond that, you do also get an AMD VCE encoder, which will still work in OBS, it will still work in Handbrake, and will still provide a degree of acceleration when it comes to editing and programs and bits and pieces like that. No, it's not going to be exceptionally great, but at the same time, if you did want to do a bit of media work, you have got 4 cores, you have got AMD VCE, you can get away with a decent chunk of it. Honestly though, if that's your focus, well, we are going to be taking a look at those higher core count Xeons in the future. I've got one in the cupboard, I've just not got around to setting it up yet, which is probably a better alternative, admittedly a more expensive alternative, but one that does give you a higher core count. So yes, you can do some editing work, yes you can do some media work, yes you can do some recording, and yes you will get some graphical acceleration from the RX 580 that is in the system. There are a couple of boring points we do have to include, such as thermals, because, well, thermal performance is something that matters to some people, especially on these cheaper computers. Personally, to me, I couldn't care what temperature it runs at if it was cheap to build, but at the same time, during a full stress test, we saw the graphics card being the hot point at 81 degrees, and the processor didn't really go above sort of 55 to 58 degrees. It's not using much power, and it's got water cooling, so it's not exactly surprising that it was like that. And when it comes to the power consumption of this system, when it was at idle it used 38 watts, we have got a pump that's constantly on, we've got fans, we've got a graphics card, it's a full system, it's going to use a bit of power. Light usage, so like desktop work and maybe a little bit of lightweight editing brought us up to 57 watts, and of course gaming was just north of 200 watts. In a full-on stress test it brought us up to 237 watts, which is more than enough for our little 430 watt power supply to deal with. Honestly though, if we were upgrading these components, I think we'd probably need a new power supply before we start putting in things like maybe a Vega 64 or Vega 56, or maybe even something like a GTX 1080 or 980 Ti. All would be very viable upgrades for a PC like this. But there are going to be some people crying out saying, why have you not run Linux on this? And you are right, this is one of these systems that we built on this channel that actually makes sense to run Linux. It's running a modern AMD graphics card that can utilize the latest drivers, and to be fair, that little Xeon should be able to handle the translation calls for Proton absolutely fine. So what I have gone ahead and done is record an entire segment where we throw Linux on here, and we have a little bit of experimenting around with some games that we have already run, and some games that we haven't, just to get an idea of how the system performs over on Linux, and whether or not it's a good idea if you are looking at building a cheap system, because at the end of the day, it's 2026 and not everyone is interested in running Windows 11. Personally, if I was running Windows 11, I only use the IoT version because I have had to use the normal Windows 11, and it is downright terrible. So yeah, if you can use maybe an alternative like Linux, well, we are going to see if that's a good idea. So in terms of overall performance here on Windows, for 85 quid I can't really fault it. It plays all the games it needs to, it's cool, it's quiet, it's decently power efficient, and you know what? I'm happy with that. That is a PC that anyone could throw together. Now this PC, after it leaves me working on it, will still be running Windows 11, but a lot of people that are going to be looking into building something like this may want Linux as an option. So I've gone ahead and I've got a distro, it's Elementary OS, and I've got it on this USB stick. To be fair, I'm just using Elementary OS because I like it, it seems to run well for games, and I already had the ISO downloaded. People can throw whatever they want on here, but at the end of the day, I'm sure you'll get similar performance across the board. So why don't we put Linux on here real quick. I'm going to change the SSDs around just so that way I don't have to reinstall Windows before it leaves the house. Everything here is a little bit of a mess because I've been so busy benchmarking. A lot of benchmarking has been done today. I'm not even going to put the side panel back on because from this camera angle, you can't see the mess that is behind. Okay, hopefully this doesn't run into a crazy amount of partitioning problems like last time we were messing with Linux. And you know what? I'm not a huge fan of these NZXT cases. They were everywhere about 10 years ago. But to be fair, thermals haven't really been a massive problem. I mean, to be fair, it's a very low wattage processor running through water cooling. How long that water cooling lasts, we shall wait and see. I have used a Tusa water cooler before. It's been used for well over a year, constantly running pretty much. Not exactly in the best environment, so it's probably crammed full of dirt. It's still working, it's running a Core i7 that's been overclocked. Yeah, it's dealing with something more intensive than this in a far worse setup. And it's still going. But we should have Linux on here in no time. I just want to run NeoFetch, bring up the specifications, make sure it's running the right drivers. If you do run into this problem with Elementary OS, it seems to be a bit buggy in its latest form. You get the account disabled, just turn off the computer fully and then turn it back on. There are probably going to be some people that haven't watched the original video. Yeah, this is one of the cleaner parts of it. And it is just scuffed and covered in dirt. There is dirt buildup nearly everywhere on here. So we are running Elementary OS 8, got the Radeon RX 580, which lists all of the Polaris cards of its series. So we're going to get Steam running on here, I'm going to make sure all the drivers are up to date, and then we're going to set some games to download overnight. May as well get RimWorld. We haven't tested RimWorld yet, that'll be a good one just to put some load on the processor and should work pretty good. I think we go with Halo again, that was a pretty good benchmark over here on Linux. We'll leave that downloading overnight, and then our next section will be in the morning, where we can actually go through and test these. Now, someone is going to pipe in and say, what about Steam Local Transfer? It does work sometimes, and then it drops out, and then sometimes it starts working again. Honestly, I've done enough filming for the day, so I'm quite happy just leaving the computer doing its own thing. It's another good test of the water cooling system because it's already survived 24 hours downloading Fortnite, which then didn't work. So, yeah, we can give it another 24 hours and make sure the system just doesn't straight up die, which sounds pretty good to me. So far, the Linux experience has been absolutely fine. I've left it downloading overnight, it was absolutely okay. Water cooling, once again, has now been ran for at least 48 hours and has been, well, it's worked, which is enough. And yeah, everything here, at least on Elementary OS, has been working absolutely fine. We've got a couple of updates doing, so MasterChef Collection is downloading a couple of updates, but why don't we start with GTA 5? There's only a few benchmarks I want to do, just to get a rough idea on how performance is doing. We've done very little tweaking or setting up. All we've done is install the distro, let it update, make sure we're on the latest AMD drivers, and that's all it's been. And to be fair, it has been very speedy. It's been very nice to use. I mean, I think the last time we were using Linux was on the Core 2 Quad, and that was definitely a bit more, well, it took a while, especially the shader compilation. That took a long time. But we'll start off with GTA 5, just make sure it's all working, make sure it's all good, make sure performance is okay. I've got a capture card set up so I can overlay some footage. But yeah, we'll just get this launched. I've already set it up for the right settings, I've already double checked it works. We're not going to run into any unforeseen circumstances. Why have I got no keyboard? Just unplug it and plug it back in. Do we get keyboard back? Can we make it outside the house? Well, after having done seemingly nothing, it has just fixed itself, and performance is pretty solid, to be honest. It's running around 57 to 60 FPS. Frame times do seem rather decent. The game does feel smoother here than it did over on Windows, but then again, it was fairly solid over on Windows in the first place to begin with. I mean, to be fair, it's doing DirectX 12 to Vulkan right now. The RX 580 will be dealing with that absolutely fine. The Xeon is dealing with the overhead perfectly. Pretty much no problems here on Linux. So really, if you wanted to be playing stuff like this, you can use Windows, you can use Linux. You'll be getting a pretty good experience on both. It's also worth keeping in mind that I haven't done any undervolting or power mods or anything like that here on Linux. We are just using it straight up out of the box, so that is a disadvantage it does have going against it. But at the same time, you know what, I'm going to say that's not a problem. GTA 5, just launching it, giving it a quick go, it's working absolutely fine out of the box. So let's move on to something else. As of the moment, BeamNG has locked up the entire system. I don't know why. It happened when I spawned in the traffic. Up till this point, it was running better than Windows, but the system is not very happy. It's not responding to anything at all. So I'm going to try rebooting it, and we'll see if that fixes it. Well, I'm not going to try spawning in the traffic again, because for some reason that seems to lock up the entire system. I have tried with a different version of Proton. It doesn't seem to make too much of a difference. Honestly, given that our processor is at such low utilization right now, yeah, I want to say you've got plenty of headroom if you did want to fix things and get the traffic running. But BeamNG, should be absolutely no surprise here, is running great here on Linux. It always does. There is a native port. I have never had much luck with the native port. I know it's still very early access temperamental, but honestly, yeah, BeamNG, we're running the exact same settings we were running over on Windows. We're getting around sort of 50 FPS, drops down to around the mid-40s. It's kind of a fantastic experience. This system is golden for Linux, keep in mind. It deals with Vulkan so well. We've got 8 threads. It deals with the translation layers and the calls absolutely fine. Yeah, really, you could just leave this system running Linux and you could be perfectly happy. Provided you don't mind dealing with the occasional problem from time to time, but at the same time, if you're running Linux, you're probably fine with that. But yeah, I'm happy with that. BeamNG, why don't we try something else? Try a little bit of RimWorld, because that's a good test that should run the same on all operating systems. I don't really think RimWorld is much of a challenge for this computer, or any computer, given the graphics card has to do very little. We are running it at 3 times speed, and the tick rate seems absolutely fine. If I put it up to 4 times, it also seems absolutely fine. Honestly, I think a little Xeon like this is going to be able to handle this game probably well into the late game, provided you don't mind a little bit of slowdown. I know version 1.6 did add a good degree of multi-threading, but at the same time, it is still a very single-threaded game in certain areas. I know the colony that we've got here is only absolutely minuscule, but at the same time, there's a bit of combat going on now. Where's this combat? Oh, there's a site stealer. So we just get everyone outside. Yeah, this is running pretty much golden. There we go, capture the site stealer. See, we do a little bit of everything in this series. This is like the world's longest RimWorld playthrough with how long this one's been going on. And we've finally just got a site stealer. Still, I don't think it really matters if you're playing this on Windows or if you're playing this on Linux. This should work absolutely fine on a system like this. I just wanted to include it because 1, we didn't benchmark it on Windows, and 2, it's a good test of showing that Linux can run games, I suppose. Just a fun one to end with Halo Reach running with the enhanced settings, so this is about as high as the game goes. It was quite a fun benchmark to do because the novelty of seeing what was once an Xbox 360 exclusive, now running absolutely fine here on Linux with arguably smoother frame times, because to be fair, I have noticed a lot of these games do tend to run even better on Linux, at least parts of the MasterChef collection, so I can't really argue with any of this. There we go, so this is running completely maxed out. The graphics card is not having to do much. The processor, even with all the translation layers, is also not having to do much. Yeah, this is running really nicely. Then again, we did see it run really nicely last time we tested it. I cannot remember what it was on. Was it on the Core 2 quad? I think it might have been this exact system we did test it on, but we were still running, well, the Core i3. I think this game just runs really well on Linux. I think that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day. Yeah, this is running pretty much perfectly. I don't really have all too many other comments, to be honest, because I don't think there's going to be a slowdown. I mean, it's sort of running at a locked 60 FPS with 1% lows down to a sort of around 54. You know what? Halo Reach, ultra settings, part of the MasterChef collection, running perfectly fine. The graphics card is not having to do that much. I'm doing a terrible job at this as well because I've ran out of ammo. Oh well, there we go. Halo Reach runs pretty much perfect. You get great graphics, you get great frame times, and you don't have any compatibility problems here on Linux, which is lovely to see. So we'll call it quits there. Linux has been a pretty fantastic experience on this system, and arguably you could use either Windows or Linux on here, and both of which will run absolutely fine. Gonna call that good. So there we have it, our £85 gaming computer, and what are my thoughts? Well, at the end of the day, we are limited to a maximum of 4 cores on this system, but that little Xeon seems like it's capable of so much more than the graphics card we are running in here. So I think what I'm going to try and do is get a hold of another one of those Xeons, get a hold of the i7 equivalent, just double check there's no difference, there probably isn't, and then we'll do a dedicated video to see just how far you can go on the Haswell platform. At least for someone that's not looking at spending a ton of money on an overclocking setup and all that, because let's be honest, if you're spending that much money, just buy like a Zen processor or get into AM4, it'll give you more longevity. But at the end of the day, I think for your average person looking at spending under £100, this is sort of the territory you're in now, and because these systems are so cheap, as our last video on this NZXT PC proved, you can pick them up for next to nothing. And we got some gaming done on that, so I think that's really what you should look at doing. Get a cheap Haswell gaming computer, save up to do some upgrades to it, go with one of these Xeons, the best graphics card you can afford or your power supply can run, and you're pretty much sorted for gaming in 2026. So yeah, it's been an interesting one. At the end of the day, this PC is going towards someone as a bit of an upgrade over what they're using now. I think they're either using Sandy Bridge or a first-gen Core i series processor, so this is a bit of a leap up from that. But at the end of the day, I hope this has been not just informative, but a bit of fun. So if you're looking at building a cheap computer, you've got a good idea of where to start. And if you were looking at upgrading your Haswell system, well, you've got a few ideas what kind of parts might work. So thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and good night.